Hi, I'm Matt Stoller, author of the Monopoly-focused Substack newsletter Big and host of the podcast Organized Money. I look at the world of finance and monopoly, but from your point of view, the people's point of view. Today there's a lot of talk about oligarchy, the super rich, big tech titans, private equity, whatever. But today I want to ask a simple question. What is a billionaire? And also, why are billionaires so powerful? Has that always been the case in America? What happened? We'll start with the basics. When I was a kid, I thought about super rich people as something like this.
Swimming in it!
Most people think a billionaire is someone with a lot of money, a sort of Scrooge McDuck who goes swimming in a pool of gold coins. And why wouldn't we? The name billionaire has the word billion in it. So clearly it means having net worth of at least 10 figures. And in his sense, the Scrooge McDuck model is technically true. They have a lot of money. But let's take a look at the top ranks of the Bloomberg Billionaire Index. It's true that all of them have more than $1 billion. But why? Notice that nearly all of the leaders are people who own a corporation with substantial amounts of market power in one or more markets. So Jeff Bezos and Amazon, Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook, Larry Page and Sergey Brin of Google, Bill Gates, Steve Ballmer of Microsoft. These are people who own chunks of very, very big companies. And there's something else that's curious. Most of these companies are being sued or investigated for monopolization, a crime which means control or controlling a market. In other words, being a billionaire or an oligarch isn't just about cash, it's about power. And at that level of wealth, what we're really doing is accounting for that power. Now, billionaire Warren Buffett often said that his favorite business model is a toll booth. You collect a piece from everyone going by, there's a little upkeep, and you can keep raising prices without losing customers. Today he uses the term moat because it sounds charming and quirky. That's how he talks to investors, but it's the same thing. Billionaires use market power to extract revenue the way that a toll booth operator does, but they do it on a much bigger scale. Google, for instance, has between 10 and 15 billion searches a day. That's roughly 90% of the search market. And just a small amount of money off some portion of those searches adds up to a lot. And they have the ability to raise prices if they want and when they want. Put another way, the Bloomberg Billionaire Index isn't a list of the most important Scrooge McDucks in the economy. It's a list of the biggest toll booth operators in the world.
Swimming in it!
So that's the basics. We've got toll booth operators across much of our economy. Believe it or not, though, that's actually a new thing in America. So in 1980, there were 13 American billionaires. Today, there are 748. That's 55 times as many. For context, $1 in 1980 is worth about $4 today. So that's a big difference. The number of billionaires have increased way more than the rate of inflation. So what happened? The story of the rise of billionaires is not actually just a story of business. It's a story of law. And it's something that we've experienced as a country before. So I think I'm going to take you back to the time when we first started with billionaires. So in the late 19th century, the US didn't really have laws to constrain big business. We didn't have big business. And so, the 19th century was railroads were new, like local commerce was local. But then this new technology developed, and we saw, as a result, a whole series of fantastically rich men like John D. Rockefeller, seized control of our industries. And he became one of the first big toll booth operators. So starting out as an oil refiner in Cleveland, after the Civil War, Rockefeller began buying out other refiners. Now, Cleveland was important because it had many railroads connecting the oil fields of Pennsylvania and Ohio to refineries. It was, in effect, a network system. And that's where market power came from. So Rockefeller started shipping so much oil that he gained power over the railroads. He was their biggest customer. Cornelius Vanderbilt, who really was America's first tycoon, said that Rockefeller was the only man he ever really feared. So using his market power, he got discounts on the oil he shipped, which you would expect. But then he did something more interesting that paved the way for billionaires going forward, including today. He started demanding that railroads give him rebates, discounts, on oil that his competitors shipped. In other words, he started taxing the entire industry, including his competition. And because of that, he soon underpriced his competitors and was able to force them out of business or force them to sell out to him. And it brought essentially the whole industry under his control. And by the 1890s, Rockefeller became a billionaire in 1890s money. But then, Americans realized that allowing one man to erect a giant toll booth around the economy in such an important area like oil was not something that we could allow in a democracy. So, we the people passed a whole set of laws, like antitrust laws, tax laws, bankruptcy laws, regulatory laws, to deal with it. So in 1936, a famous author named Walter Lippmann wrote upon the death of John D. Rockefeller. Before he started his enterprises, it was not possible to make so much money. Before he died, it had become the settled policy of this country that no man be permitted to make so much money. He lived long enough to see the methods by which such a fortune can be accumulated, outlawed by public opinion, forbidden by statute, and prevented by the tax laws. So what happened? Well, let's talk about today's billionaires, such as Microsoft's Bill Gates. Gates came into his prime in the 1980s, and he did something that was very similar to that of Rockefeller, but he didn't do it with oil, he did it with personal computing. Now, at the time, in the late 1970s, early 80s, personal computers, that industry was full of independent, weird hobbyists experimenting with communications, hardware, art, software. But there were a couple of important changes that happened, and these were legal changes. So in 1976 and 1980, Congress allowed the copyrighting of software. IBM, which controlled the computer industry, had been under aggressive antitrust investigations and litigation since 1967. And so when IBM chose to build a personal computer, it outsourced a lot of components, which it hadn't done before. It was very control-oriented, including the operating system, MS-DOS, to Gates' company. And importantly, IBM did something very uncharacteristic of IBM at the time, which is they allowed Gates to license his operating system to other equipment makers. Now, that kind of relationship with a vendor, that level of freedom, was a shocking change for IBM, because it almost always made everything in-house or controlled its suppliers very aggressively. But IBM treated Microsoft differently, transferring large amounts of programming knowledge to the small corporation. And it was because of the legal pressure. That was the sort of one of the last gasps of law from the Rockefeller era. But in 1982, the Reagan administration dropped that lawsuit against IBM. And then a whole bunch of laws, particularly antitrust law, set up during Rockefeller's time, basically stopped being enforced. Not entirely, but mostly. Now back to Microsoft. Gates at first didn't think operating systems were that important. He wanted to sell programming languages. But soon he realized that the operating system was a key on-ramp to the personal computer, a toll booth or a choke point for all other software. And like Rockefeller with railroads and pipelines, Gates began using rebates to control this network industry. He built a licensing regime that charged personal computer makers a fee for installing his operating system. That's standard. But more importantly, his licensing regime effectively required computer makers to pay a fee if they installed a rival operating system. In other words, Gates imposed a tax on the entire industry, including his competitors, much as Rockefeller had using his relationship with railroads. Now, the key toll for both was not technology, but pricing in the form of the rebate. Gates then used his control of the operating system to take control of the most key applications on personal computer. So Microsoft Word defeated WordPerfect, and Excel defeated Lotus 1-2-3. By the late 1990s, Microsoft executives were talking about getting a VIG, which is a mobster term for a piece of the action, out of every transaction that happened on the new space called the Internet. Microsoft began putting lots of money into new ventures to take over entire swaths of the real economy, many of which didn't work or were out of place for a software company. So there's a reason that it's actually called MSNBC. That MS stands for Microsoft. The last straw for Microsoft was when that company essentially sat down a group of venture capitalists, really rich guys, and told them where they could invest, and then told them where Microsoft was investing and what was off limits to them. When Microsoft sought to kill Netscape, which was the then on-ramp to the Internet, it was obvious that Gates wanted to extend his control to this new space. He couldn't and didn't because of a major antitrust lawsuit launched in 1998 by the federal government, prompted by a lot of these venture capitalists. Now, Gates had sought to become Facebook, Google, and Amazon all rolled into one, and would have been able to if antitrust enforcers hadn't stepped in. Now, Gates is a very good businessman. He's a very smart guy, and he would have been wealthy regardless. But if he had been, operating in the 1950s, he would have made maybe $10 million, $50 million, not $100 billion. He has massive amounts of power and money because he captured control of a very important toll booth in the economy at a very early stage in its creation. We call him a billionaire because when you measure what his power is worth, it comes to $100 billion or so, plus whatever he's put in the Gates Foundation. But the dollar figure is just the accounting system. There's no swimming pool full of gold coins. There is a toll booth called Microsoft Windows and all of the adjacent products that they've built and bought. Now, to give some more context on the cost of this legal framework, let's go back to that weird community of hobbyists making software in the 1970s and 80s. They were doing cool, creative things, but gradually, all of those little businesses were eliminated. Either Microsoft or some other software giant took them over and created often brittle or worse products. Now, Microsoft became known as the blue screen of death in the 90s. Today, its products, which are installed across US government and in every major corporation, are routinely hacked because the company just doesn't spend enough on quality. It doesn't have the competition to force them to. More broadly, today, everything from yoga studio software to convenience store software is run by oligopolists or monopolists, and they often frustrate the people who work in these industries. This kind of wealth, because these companies make money, is not a swimming pool full of coins. It's a toll booth that prevents people from building, from tinkering, from running their businesses the way that they want to. And that is actually true for a lot of billionaires, most billionaires even. They're not people with a bunch of dollar bills stacked to the moon. They are men with a strategic position of power, protected by public laws and rules. Now, there's no reason we have to enable such people to run our culture or to foreclose new businesses. At the end of the day, toll booths are nothing but bottlenecks on a road on which we would otherwise travel faster and more freely. We should blow them up, and we've done it before. Thanks for watching this big breakdown on the Breaking Points channel. If you'd like to know more about big business and how our economy really works, you can sign up by going to the link in the description below and accessing my Market Power Focus newsletter, Big, or my Market Power Focus podcast, Organized Money. Thanks, and have a good one.
Hey, if you like that video, hit the like button or leave a comment below. It really helps get the show to more people.
And if you'd like to get the full show ad-free and in your inbox every morning, you can sign up at breakingpoints.com.
That's right. Get the full show, help support the future of independent media at breakingpoints.com.